Welcome back. My name is Caitlin. If you're new here, I love all things beauty, so if you're into that kind of thing, then subscribe before you leave. Today I'm going to go over some eyeshadow palettes that I feel fit the holiday vibes, or at least what I consider to be holiday vibes, and I'll go over what that means to me. So basically, when I think holiday makeup, I think of golds, bronzes, burgundies, and also like jewel toned shades. Now, don't get me wrong, I feel like any time of year you can wear whatever kind of makeup you want to, but these are just sort of what I would consider the typical holiday color schemes, I guess. So let's go ahead and just get started. I'll start with what I have on my eyes today, which is the Natasha Denona Gold palette, and she looks like this. Now, I know that you currently cannot get this, but I feel like the past couple years, Natasha Denona has sort of intermittently brought back the gold palette. So just because it may not be available right now doesn't mean she's never going to bring it back again. But I mean, the gold palette is sort of says it right there in the name for me. It's got the gold tones, the bronze tones, and then with the blues that are in there to give it the antique gold look, I think that helps provide some of the jewel tones, and I think it's just a really great overall holiday palette. You can keep things kind of light, or you can smoke it up. You can go heavy on the gold or mix in some of the bronze if you don't want to go fully gold like the yellow gold. I just love this palette. I'm gonna go through, I don't have a particular order. I didn't like rank these top to bottom. I'm gonna go through in the order of like sort of the oldest to the newest. But just because they're old, like I have a feeling a lot of you will probably already have these eyeshadow palettes, and I think it's important to remember to not forget about the makeup that we already have and the stuff that we loved in years past. Chances are you still probably have it, and I think it's still just as good. The Urban Decay Stoned Vibes palette. So this is like pretty typical of what I would consider jewel tones, and it's got the glitteriness of it. Because it's like a mainstream brand, it doesn't go over the top with glitter like some indie eyeshadows can. So even though they may look kind of intimidating in the pan, once you have them on the eyelid and if you go pretty sheer with them, I think they look pretty beautiful, and I think you can get a pretty subtle look. And then the mattes that are there, like the purple and this sort of burnt terracotta, I think also just very much fit the holiday vibes. In terms of like the actual colored tones, you got some of the jewel tones with like the blue and the purple. You've got gold, and then green, of course. It's a pretty typical holiday color. Overall, I just think this is a really great palette. Next up, going more into the glittery realm, is the Flower Beauty Jungle Lights palette. So you've got the green and the red to make them like Christmas colors, I suppose, if you want to go that way. But then also the purples that are down here. I think these are just really great jewel-toned, sparkly, just like foiled looking eyeshadows. You can basically just put one of these all over the lid and call it done. And you can go as sheer or as built up as you want. I find the more you build them up, the more likely they are to crease, at least on me, but I have pretty like oily eyelids and they're hooded, so they're gonna be more prone to creasing anyways. But whenever I wear these shadows, I always love how the look comes out. So definitely a worthwhile holiday palette. All right, the next one up might be somewhat surprising, but to me it definitely fits the holiday vibes, and it's the McGrath Moonlit Seduction. So to me, because it's got like the burgundy tones in there, I think those are perfect. And then the golds and like white gold of the shimmering toppers, I think make it a perfect holiday palette. You can definitely keep it pretty subtle by just using the mattes, but to me, like what makes this palette great is the shimmery toppers. So definitely, if I'm using this for a holiday look, I'm going for the glitter. It's got the white gold, like the pure gold, and then the duochrome glitter, which has a little bit of a red base to it. And I love these shades so much. I think any look that you put together with this can definitely hit the holiday vibes. All right, now we're coming into a little bit more of the newer palettes, or at least newer to me palettes. And starting those off is the Nomad, the Royal Europe. So this to me is definitely one of the more colorful ones, but it's really focusing on the jewel tones. So, you know, the reds, purples, teals, greens. And then of course you've just got the little bit of gold in here. So this kind of hits all of the boxes. I think the shades in here are stunning, and because the shades at the bottom are all multi-chromes, you can just really get a dimensional look, multi-dimensional look, hence the multi-chromes. I also believe that this palette is still up on the website. You can definitely still get it. The Flower Beauty one also you can get, and it should be said for the Pat McGrath too. So really I think the only ones that I'm talking about today that you might not be able to get are the gold palette and that Urban Decay palette. Next up is the Natasha Denona Xenon palette. Now, this is pretty monochromatic and there's no jewel tones or anything, but it does have the glittery toppers, and this is perfect to create a smoky look. So kind of specifically to me, this is more of like a New Year's Eve party holiday look, but definitely keeping the smoky eye in mind. I think this is a perfect palette for it. Depending on your skin tone, some of these shades might not look the best on you. This is, I'm pretty sure, like the most cool tone palette that Natasha Denona has ever done. The lighter shades that are in here are all pretty similar, so unless you're like fair toned like me or also leaning on the cooler side, like the 4 lighter shades in here might all look the same. I think if you're going for a very specific cool toned smokier look, I think this is a great palette to achieve that. Next up are 3 of the Oden's Eye Christmas release palettes, 2 of them that were released last year but re-released this year, which is when I got them. And then I only kind of chose 1 of the releases from this year. I put the other one sort of in a runner-up category, which those will be coming at the end because I, of course, have no chill and cannot only pick 10 eyeshadow palettes because I have so many. So I'll start with the one of this year's that I think fits more in with the holiday vibes, and it's the Snow Dream palette. So I chose this one more specifically because it has more of the typical holiday colors, like the greens and the reds, and it does have some of the gold tones, like the golds, and then like the mustard mattes, I think are what make it a pretty good holiday palette. So just to me, this fits more of the holiday vibes than the Hey Reindeer palette, just because this is more typical holiday colors. Now don't get me wrong, I like the Hey Reindeer palette as well. I just don't know for me that it fits into the holiday vibes as much as this one does. And it does have that frankincense, the like holographic shade. So on my middle finger is the holographic shade. I'm not sure if you're really going to be able to pick it up so much in this lighting, but I think it's just a really beautiful shade. I think in low lighting, that holographic shade is going to just pop. So that brings me to the palettes that were released last year with Oden's Eye and then re-released this year. So starting with the Christmas Eve palette, this is the more cool toned palette, but then it still has a bit more of the jewel tones. So the blues, and then the way that the green in here is a little bit more jewel toned of a green. And then you've got like some purple, and then that duochrome, which is like a bluey purple shift. I think this is a really great cool toned option for getting some of those jewel tones. And then of course the Merry Christmas palette, which is again more typical of the Christmas shades. You've got the straight up reds and greens in here, and then a little bit of gold to go with it. Okay, last palette of the 10 that I chose before I get into the runner-ups. And this also might come as a surprise, or maybe not something that you would think of right off the top of the head. but it's the Adept Arrow inspired palette. Mainly I chose this. The mattes are pretty focused on greens, which to me makes it a holiday palette. So you've got some of the like grungier looking greens, or like the kind of like pukey looking greens, but then on this end you've got more of the jewel toned greens, and then of course a lot of the multi-chromes are leaning blues and greens, which just really gives it the jewel toned look. And then of course, just because all of them are really sparkly, like that also just screams holiday to me. Kind of unexpected, but to me this definitely fits what I consider to be the holiday vibes. All right, so those complete what I would say are the 10 most holiday palettes that I have, and now I have 5 runner-ups. Sticking with Adept, I actually think that the Samarian Sunset is kind of holiday, mainly because you've got reds and greens, but they aren't like true reds and greens, and then just the sparkles. So maybe not, like some of the ones that lean more pink might not be as holiday, but although they lean a little bit more pink, they still kind of have the jewel tonedness to it. And then some of the other shimmers don't have a lot of really strong base pigments, and they're kind of just glitter. Well, not glitter, but just like sparkly, which I think anytime you add sparkle to a look, it's gonna make it seem a little bit holiday. Next runner up, and it's kind of like a basic palette, and why I wouldn't necessarily consider it a top holiday palette is because it's like the most neutral, I suppose, and it's the Wayne Goss Tourmaline palette. So it may not seem like much, but the topper that's in here is gold, which I think is what helps make it. And then just the fact that the mattes and like satins in here are more on the maroon side, like that's kind of why I chose it to be holiday. So I think if you were to put one of those two satin mattes or whatever in the outer corner and then just put that gold like wet shine all over the lid, it's a very basic, super simple holiday look. So now let's talk about the Oden's Eye Hey Reindeer palette. And I think you'll see a little bit more of what I'm talking about just when I open the palette. So just looking at this, it doesn't scream holiday to me. It has some of the golds in there, I guess, which can make it a little bit more that way, but the mattes that are in here, although I love them and they're beautiful and I love the mutedness of them, it doesn't exactly scream holiday to me, but it's a runner-up because it is Reindeer. Like it was released as a holiday palette, but I don't know that I would necessarily be using this to create holiday looks. Kind of Oden's Eye heavy video because I have another one here, and it's the Norns palette. So it's got the reds and greens in there, but it also has the jewel tones, and it's leaning a little bit more on the cooler side, which makes it more of a wintry holiday palette to me. So I think, although it may not seem like it, so you can see we've got reds and greens and jewel tones. Not super holiday, but I think it has enough of the characteristics that it's a good runner-up palette to me for that. Last runner-up palette, and this also might be kind of surprising or like a curveball, but it's actually the Glamlite A Nightmare on Elm Street, the Freddy Krueger palette, which is the green one. This would be like a holiday grunge palette. So you can lean a lot more on the greens and the deeper greens, but then it does have a couple golds in here, which you can make it a little bit more on the lighter side and like brighter side. So seeing them right here, I think this shows exactly why it can be a good holiday palette. Keeping it more on the lighter side, like with that gold or the jewel tone green, and pairing it with the lighter green matte. Or if you just want to stick with the bronze. I think sometimes when you can see what shades look like outside of the color story, so like looking at it like this, yeah, it doesn't really seem all that holiday. It looks pretty dark and definitely more on the fall Halloween, since it's a a Halloween release. But I think seeing them swatched out separately, you can see how you can get some holiday looks. Like, you don't have to go as deep and dark as you may think you have to just looking at the palette. I think, just because it's an eyeshadow palette, you don't have to use all of the shades. You can just use one or two and create absolutely beautiful looks that can definitely surprise you. All right, so those are my 10 holiday palettes and my 5 runner-up holiday palettes. It leans pretty heavily on Oden's Eye and indie brands in general. So Oden's Eye had, 5 palettes in there, 2 Adept, a Nomad. I think that kind of shows, that's just sort of where my direction has been lately, is into the indie brand eyeshadows. Don't get me wrong, I still love so Natasha Denona, one of my favorite eyeshadow palette formulas ever, but generally mainstream makeup brands are making pretty, I don't want to say boring eyeshadow palettes, but they're definitely catering to a wider audience, and they're held more to the customer's demand, I suppose. Whereas, in my opinion, indie brands, the people that are shopping at indie brands are generally looking for more colorful, out-of-the-box type color stories, whereas if you're shopping in stores like Sephora and Ulta, you might not really be going for that sort of thing, which, to each their own, everybody has what they're looking for. But for me lately, I'm skewing towards the more colorful, glittery, out-of-the-box type looks, which is why I've been favoring some of my indie brand eyeshadow palettes. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new here and you liked this and you want to see more stuff like this, then subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you are looking forward to for the holiday season. Do you and your families do big get-togethers? Do you have to do a lot of holiday shopping, Christmas presents, stuff like that? Let me know. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Bye.